The story of Rome begins not with empire or conquest, but with geography and endurance. Long before legions marched or marble cities rose, central Italy was a region of rolling hills, forests, and winding rivers. The Tiber cut a path through this landscape, creating fertile plains that offered both sustenance and vulnerability. Archaeological evidence from the Palatine and Capitoline Hills reveals that by the 10th century BCE, clusters of small huts and primitive graves marked the lives of Latin tribes who farmed, traded, and built kin-based settlements. These early communities chose their sites for defense and water access, forming the foundation upon which one of history's greatest civilizations would rise. By the 9th century BCE, this region had become a crossroads for different cultures. The Latins occupied the lowlands, the Sabines controlled the nearby mountains, and to the north, the Etruscans developed one of Italy's most advanced societies. The Latins brought their Indo-European language and agricultural traditions, while the Etruscans contributed engineering, metalwork, and organized urban planning. Contact between these peoples occurred through trade and conflict, leaving traces in pottery styles, burial customs, and religious practices. Over time, the Latin communities on the hills near the Tiber began to merge, forming a settlement whose strategic position would soon dominate central Italy. By the middle of the 8th century BCE, that settlement had grown large enough to require boundaries and leadership. Tradition holds that Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, who united several hilltop villages into one city. While the legend of Romulus and Remus belongs to myth, it reflects an underlying truth that unity in early Rome emerged from rivalry, negotiation, and necessity. Archaeology confirms that around this time, fortifications appeared on the Palatine Hill, accompanied by communal sanctuaries and a shared marketplace in the low-lying valley that would become the Roman Forum. What began as scattered settlements was becoming an organized urban center. The earliest political organization of Rome was monarchical, though very different from the absolute monarchies of later history. The king served as both war leader and high priest, chosen from the most powerful clans. 7 kings are traditionally remembered, beginning with Romulus and ending with Tarquinius Superbus. Beneath their legendary deeds lies a gradual process of state formation. During this period, Rome transformed from a tribal federation into a true city-state, capable of building monuments, codifying rituals, and organizing its population for labor and defense. Under the influence of the Etruscans, Rome entered its first age of public works. In the 7th century BCE, kings such as Tarquinius Priscus and Servius Tullius oversaw construction projects that permanently altered the city. Streets were paved, temples erected, and drainage systems dug to reclaim the marshy valley between the hills. The most significant of these projects, the Cloaca Maxima, channeled runoff from the city into the Tiber River, creating dry ground for civic buildings and markets. This engineering feat symbolized a society that valued order, labor, and communal effort, principles that would define Roman identity. Religion developed alongside these institutions. Early Romans believed that divine forces, called noumena, inhabited every aspect of nature. To ensure balance, they performed rituals with precision, believing that exactness maintained favor with the gods. This devotion to method and law shaped Roman character as much as faith itself. Religious offices, ceremonies, and augury became instruments of social cohesion and political legitimacy. Each household, guild, and public institution had its rituals, linking private life to the collective destiny of the city. As Rome grew, its social structure became more complex. The population divided between patricians, the aristocratic descendants of the founding clans, and plebeians, the larger class of farmers, artisans, and traders. Patricians dominated politics and religion, while plebeians provided the labor and military strength that sustained the community. This division was not yet a source of open conflict, but created the framework for later struggles that would shape the republic's laws and constitution. By the 6th century BCE, Rome had become one of the most powerful cities in Latium. Its kings established alliances, fought wars, and expanded control over neighboring territories. Servius Tullius introduced the first census, classifying citizens by wealth and linking property to military obligation. This innovation laid the foundation for Rome's future system of legions, where service was both a duty and a privilege. The Servian Wall, built under his reign, enclosed the city in stone, a declaration of permanence and self-confidence. Yet Rome's relationship with its Etruscan rulers grew strained. The final monarch, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled with increasing arrogance and relied on foreign troops to maintain power. His disregard for Roman customs and his use of fear to control the populace led to widespread resentment. According to later tradition, a scandal involving his family provoked open rebellion. In 509 BCE, the aristocracy expelled the king and abolished monarchy altogether. This act marked the birth of the Roman Republic, a political experiment that would endure for nearly 5 centuries. The transition from monarchy to republic was not merely a change of leaders, but a transformation in political philosophy. Power shifted from a single ruler to a system of shared authority. 2 annually elected consuls replaced the king, balancing each other's decisions through mutual veto. A senate composed of former magistrates advised them, ensuring continuity and collective judgment. The early republic thus combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, a structure designed to prevent tyranny and reward service to the state. Daily life in this period reflected both continuity and adaptation. Farmers cultivated wheat, barley, and olives in the surrounding countryside. Craftsmen produced tools, pottery, and weapons for local and regional trade. Markets in the Forum sold goods from Etruria and Campania, while the Tiber provided a route for commerce to the sea. Families were organized under the authority of the paterfamilias, whose power extended over property, dependents, and even life and death within the household. This strict hierarchy mirrored the political discipline of the Republic. Rome's geography continued to shape its destiny. Situated at the midpoint of the Italian peninsula, the city enjoyed access to inland trade routes and proximity to the Mediterranean. Its position made it a natural center of communication between northern and southern Italy. The hills provided defense, the river provided sustenance, and the surrounding plains supported agriculture. Unlike other early cities built on luxury or conquest, Rome's strength grew from practicality. Its founders built for endurance rather than grandeur. The social and political values forged during this time would guide Roman behavior for centuries. Respect for law, devotion to family, and reverence for tradition became the moral fabric of society. Public service was regarded as both duty and honor, while ambition was tempered by accountability. These principles, though imperfectly upheld, created a self-sustaining civic identity that endured through war, expansion, and crisis. By the close of the 6th century BCE, Rome was ready to assert itself beyond its immediate borders. Its citizens had overthrown kings, built walls, drained swamps, and created institutions that balanced order with flexibility. The republic that emerged was small in territory, but vast in potential. What began as a modest city of farmers and warriors would soon confront rival powers, adapt its government to new challenges, and expand its influence across Italy. The foundations laid in this early period, engineering skill, religious discipline, political adaptability, and collective identity, formed the enduring core of Roman civilization. From this stable base, the Republic would rise, conquer, and evolve into one of the most formidable states in history. Over the next centuries, Rome's institutions and ideals would be tested on battlefields and in senates, revealing whether a society born from rebellion could rule an empire. The early Roman Republic emerged from revolution, but its success depended on stability. Having expelled its kings, Rome faced the challenge of governing without a monarch while preserving unity among its citizens. The new constitution distributed power among elected officials, assemblies, and a senate of elder statesmen. 2 consuls served as joint executives, commanding armies and enforcing law, each able to veto the other. Beneath them, magistrates managed finance, justice, and religious rights. The Senate, though officially advisory, soon became the Republic's guiding institution, defining policy through prestige rather than decree. This balance between ambition and restraint produced a durable framework, one that could expand to govern not only a city but an entire world. The Republic's first task was survival. In the 5th century BCE, Rome was one of many Latin city-states competing for land and influence. The expulsion of the monarchy had alienated Etruscan allies, while neighboring tribes, the Volsci, Equi, and Sabines, tested Roman defenses. Warfare became annual and ritualized, fought during the agricultural off-season by citizen soldiers organized according to property. Each landholder provided his own arms and armor, serving in units defined by wealth and equipment. This citizen militia created both discipline and solidarity. Service to the Republic became the foundation of Roman identity, linking military obligation to civic privilege. During these early wars, Rome developed strategies that reflected its practical mindset. Victories were consolidated through colonization rather than destruction. Defeated enemies were granted partial citizenship, land, or alliance treaties that required military cooperation. This system, known as the Latin League, transformed former rivals into partners. Over time, Rome became the center of a growing network of obligations and loyalties across Latium. Through careful diplomacy, it extended influence without creating widespread resistance. Each alliance strengthened its manpower, enabling further campaigns and a cycle of expansion grounded in reciprocity rather than conquest. Yet internal divisions threatened this progress. The rigid distinction between patricians and plebeians, once accepted, began to provoke unrest. Plebeians demanded political rights and protection from debt slavery. The early republic faced repeated strikes known as secessions, in which plebeians withdrew from military service until their grievances were addressed. These social movements resulted in a series of reforms that reshaped Roman government. The creation of the office of tribune allowed elected representatives of the plebeians to veto unjust laws and protect citizens from abuse. Later, the codification of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written laws, made justice a matter of record rather than privilege. These developments forged an unprecedented sense of inclusiveness in a hierarchical world. While Rome's society evolved, its armies adapted to the demands of continual warfare. The phalanx formation inherited from Etruscan and Greek models proved ill-suited to Italy's rugged terrain. By the 4th century BCE, Romans developed the manipular legion, a flexible arrangement of smaller units capable of maneuvering independently. This tactical innovation became the cornerstone of Roman military success. It reflected the Republic's broader philosophy: discipline, adaptability, and organization as instruments of power. With this new army, Rome began to dominate central Italy. A defining moment came with the Gallic invasion of 390 BCE, when a band of Celtic warriors from the north captured and burned much of the city. Rome's humiliation was profound, yet its recovery was swift. The city was rebuilt with stronger walls, and military reforms intensified. The trauma of destruction instilled a permanent fear of weakness and a determination never to be conquered again. The rebuilding of Rome symbolized the resilience that would mark its history, a community capable of learning from catastrophe and turning defeat into discipline. In the following century, Rome's power expanded across Italy. Successive wars against the Etruscans, Samnites, and Greek colonies in the south tested the Republic's endurance. The Samnite Wars, lasting from 343 to 290 BCE, were especially formative. The mountainous terrain of central Italy forced Rome to refine its logistics and tactics. Victories came slowly, but each campaign extended Roman infrastructure, roads, forts, and colonies, deep into new territory. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had achieved dominance over the entire Italian peninsula. Its strength rested not only on military conquest, but also on administrative foresight. Conquered peoples retained local autonomy in exchange for military service and loyalty, a system that turned Italy into a reservoir of manpower. Rome's next confrontation would bring it onto the world stage. Across the Mediterranean, Carthage had established a powerful maritime empire centered in North Africa. Conflict between the two powers was inevitable. The First Punic War, beginning in 264 BCE, was fought primarily for control of Sicily. Initially inexperienced at sea, The Romans adapted by constructing fleets modeled on captured Carthaginian ships and training their soldiers as sailors. The introduction of the corvus, a boarding device that turned naval battles into infantry engagements, neutralized Carthage's advantage. After more than 2 decades of attrition, Rome emerged victorious in 241 BCE, gaining its first overseas province and transforming itself into a Mediterranean power. The Second Punic War tested Rome's resilience more severely than any before. In 218 BCE, the Carthaginian general Hannibal launched an audacious invasion of Italy, crossing the Alps with elephants and a multinational army. His victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae destroyed entire Roman legions and brought the Republic to the brink of collapse. Yet the Roman response revealed the depth of its civic structure. The Senate refused negotiation, consuls raised new armies, and allies remained largely loyal despite devastation. Over time, Rome's strategy shifted from direct confrontation to attrition, cutting Hannibal's supply lines and attacking Carthaginian territories abroad. In 202 BCE, Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at Zama, ending the war and establishing Roman supremacy over the western Mediterranean. Following this triumph, Rome entered an era of expansion that redefined its character. Victory over Carthage was followed by campaigns in Greece, Macedonia, and Asia Minor. Roman armies, disciplined and ambitious, encountered the wealth and sophistication of the Hellenistic world. Conquests brought immense riches and slaves, fueling both economic growth and social tension. Senators became provincial governors, accumulating fortunes through taxation and trade. Meanwhile, the influx of Greek art, philosophy, and literature transformed Roman culture. Temples and forums adopted Greek architectural forms. Education embraced rhetoric and logic. Religion absorbed new deities. The Republic remained politically austere, but became culturally cosmopolitan. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome's dominion spanned from Spain to the Aegean. Its legions garrisoned provinces, protected trade routes, and enforced taxation. Yet the same system that built this empire began to strain under its own weight. The citizen soldiers who had once formed the backbone of Rome's armies were often away for years, returning to find their farms ruined or purchased by wealthy elites. The growth of latifundia, large estates worked by slaves, undermined the rural middle class and concentrated land in fewer hands. The plebeian assemblies, though still active, struggled to represent a populace increasingly divided by wealth. Despite these emerging tensions, Rome's achievements during the Republic's expansion were monumental. Its legal system provided consistent governance across diverse regions. Its network of roads connected distant provinces, enabling communication and commerce. Its administration, though imperfect, established order where previously there had been fragmentation. The Republic's model of civic duty, expressed through service, law, and loyalty, inspired unity among peoples of different origins. As the 2nd century BCE drew to a close, however, the costs of empire were becoming clear. The concentration of wealth, the displacement of small farmers, and the rise of professional soldiers loyal to individual commanders rather than the state set the stage for internal conflict. The Republic had built an empire through discipline and cooperation. Now it faced the challenge of preserving those virtues amid prosperity and power. The next phase of Roman history would test whether its political framework could survive the pressures of ambition and inequality. The institutions that had guided a city-state through centuries of expansion would soon confront crises of loyalty, reform, and civil strife. Rome had conquered the world. The question was whether it could still govern itself. By the late 2nd century BCE, the Roman Republic stood unmatched in power, yet its internal structure was beginning to unravel. The conquest of the Mediterranean had brought immense wealth and new territories, but these rewards were unevenly distributed. The Senate's aristocracy accumulated fortunes through provincial administration and taxation, while small farmers, the backbone of Rome's citizen soldier class, fell into poverty. Vast estates worked by enslaved labor replaced family farms, and the rural population drifted into the city in search of subsistence. The ideals of civic virtue and shared obligation that had sustained the Republic were giving way to inequality and discontent. The first attempts at reform came from within the elite itself. In 133 BCE, Tiberius Gracchus, a tribune of the people, proposed a land redistribution law to restore public lands illegally occupied by the wealthy to dispossessed citizens. His initiative directly challenged senatorial privilege. Despite popular support, the measure provoked fierce opposition. When Tiberius sought re-election in violation of custom, violence erupted, and he was killed along with hundreds of his followers. His brother, Gaius Gracchus, later revived the cause a decade later, expanding it to include grain subsidies and citizenship rights for Italian allies. His ambitious reforms threatened the Senate's control, leading again to bloodshed. Both brothers' deaths marked a new precedent in Roman politics, the use of violence as a tool of policy. The social problems that the Gracchi sought to address remained unresolved. Economic polarization deepened as provinces poured wealth into the hands of a few. Italian allies who had fought alongside Rome for centuries demanded citizenship and equal rights. Their exclusion from the political process created growing resentment, and the Senate's refusal to act would soon spark open revolt. Meanwhile, Rome's armies were becoming instruments of personal ambition. Commanders began to rely on their soldiers' loyalty rather than the Senate's authority, shifting the balance of power from institutions to individuals. In 107 BCE, Gaius Marius, a talented general of humble origins, was elected consul. Confronted with a shortage of eligible soldiers, he opened enlistment to the landless poor, equipping them at state expense. This reform professionalized the army but also altered its allegiance. Soldiers now looked to their general for reward and protection, not to the Senate. Marius achieved brilliant victories in North Africa and against invading Germanic tribes, earning 6 consecutive consulships and enormous prestige. Yet his rise blurred the lines between civic service and personal rule. Ambitious men now saw the army as the surest path to political power. The Italian allies' discontent finally exploded in the Social War of 91 to 88 BCE. Dozens of Italian communities revolted, forming their own confederation modeled on the Roman Republic. The conflict was brutal, but Rome ultimately prevailed. To secure peace, citizenship was granted to all Italians who laid down arms, transforming the Republic into a truly peninsular state. This expansion of citizenship fundamentally changed the political landscape, adding new voters but diluting the influence of traditional Roman families. The Republic had survived the war, but its social composition and loyalties were permanently altered. Even as the social war ended, another conflict loomed, this time between Rome's leading generals. In 88 BCE, command of the campaign against King Mithridates of Pontus in Asia Minor was awarded first to Sulla, a patrician general, and then transferred by political maneuvering to Marius. Outraged, Sulla marched his army on Rome itself, the first Roman general to use military force against the capital. Marius fled, returned after Sulla's departure, and unleashed reprisals against his opponents. When Sulla later triumphed in the east and returned to Italy, he defeated the Marian faction, occupied Rome again, and declared himself dictator. His constitutional reforms sought to restore senatorial authority, but his prescriptions, state-sanctioned killings of political enemies, introduced terror into the heart of Roman governance. Sulla's dictatorship exposed the fragility of the Republic's institutions. Though he retired voluntarily in 79 BCE, his actions had shattered the taboo against military intervention in politics. In the decades that followed, powerful men competed for influence through patronage, bribery, and intimidation. The Senate, once the moral core of the Republic, became a stage for factional rivalry. The courts were corrupted by political manipulation, and public office became a means of enrichment. Meanwhile, slave uprisings and provincial unrest revealed the deep fractures within Rome's expanding empire. The most dramatic of these internal crises was the revolt led by Spartacus between 73 and 71 BCE. A former gladiator, Spartacus gathered an army of escaped slaves that defeated several Roman forces and threatened the Italian heartland. The rebellion was eventually crushed by the general Marcus Licinius Crassus, But the scale of the uprising exposed the dependency of Rome's economy on enslaved labor and the vulnerability that came with it. The aftermath was brutal. Thousands of captives were crucified along the Appian Way, but the fear it instilled further eroded confidence in the Republic's ability to maintain order. In the political sphere, three figures rose to dominate late Republican life: Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Each had achieved military or financial power unmatched by traditional politicians. To bypass the Senate's obstruction, they formed an informal alliance known as the First Triumvirate in 60 BCE. Pompey brought military prestige, Crassus immense wealth, and Caesar charismatic leadership. Together, they divided authority, securing offices and legislation that advanced their interests. The arrangement, however, rested entirely on personal trust, not law. When Crassus was killed in Parthia and Pompey aligned with the Senate, the balance collapsed, leaving Caesar in opposition. Caesar's conquest of Gaul between 58 and 50 BC transformed both his fortune and the Republic's fate. His commentaries, written in clear, deliberate prose, celebrated Rome's expansion and his own leadership. Yet his success alarmed the Senate, which ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Instead, in 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, an act of open defiance that sparked civil war. Within months, he seized control of Italy and pursued Pompey to Greece, where he won decisive victory at Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt and was murdered on arrival, leaving Caesar master of the Roman world. Caesar's rule, though brief, revealed the transformation of the Republic into an autocracy in all but name. As dictator, he implemented sweeping reforms, reorganizing the calendar, expanding the Senate, granting citizenship in the provinces, and initiating public works. Yet his concentration of power provoked fear among traditionalists who saw in him the rebirth of monarchy. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated him, proclaiming the restoration of liberty. Instead, they unleashed renewed chaos. The Republic, already weakened by decades of civil conflict, could no longer sustain itself through shared institutions or ideals. In the years that followed, Rome descended once again into war. Caesar's supporters, led by Mark Antony and the young Octavian, fought the assassins at Philippi, then turned against each other. The cycle of alliances, betrayals, and battles that ensued confirmed what many already sensed. The Republic had outlived its capacity to govern. Its laws remained, its offices still functioned, but authority now flowed from armies and personal loyalty, not from the Senate or the people. The crisis of the Republic was not a single moment, but a gradual transformation, in which the mechanisms of democracy and oligarchy were consumed by ambition and inequality. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic existed largely in name. The city that had once prided itself on shared rule and civic virtue had become the stage for rival warlords. Political assassination had replaced debate. Loyalty to individuals had supplanted loyalty to law. Out of this prolonged crisis would emerge a new system, one that promised peace through centralized authority. The Republic had produced the empire's foundations, but in doing so, it had destroyed itself. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC plunged Rome into renewed uncertainty. The conspirators claimed to have restored the Republic, but their victory was short-lived. The public, weary of civil strife and mindful of Caesar's reforms, turned against them. Power quickly shifted to his allies: Mark Antony, a seasoned commander, Marcus Lepidus, a veteran administrator, and Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted heir, known to history as Octavian. Though still in his teens, Octavian possessed both shrewd political instinct and an unrelenting will to power. The three men formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE, a legally sanctioned coalition to stabilize the state and avenge Caesar's death. Their methods were ruthless. The triumvirs compiled lists of proscribed enemies, confiscating property and ordering executions to fund their armies and eliminate opposition. Cicero, the great orator and defender of the old republic, fell victim to these purges, symbolizing the final eclipse of senatorial authority. Meanwhile, Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, had fled east to raise forces in the provinces. In 42 BCE, at the Battle of Philippi, the triumvirs crushed their armies. The conspirators' defeat extinguished the last serious attempt to revive the republican order. Rome was now governed by generals, not institutions. The alliance among the victors soon fractured under the pressure of ambition and mistrust. Lepidus was sidelined, leaving Octavian and Antony as rivals. Their division of the Roman world mirrored its internal tensions. Antony took control of the wealthy eastern provinces, forming a political and personal alliance with Cleopatra VII of Egypt. Octavian, ruling the West, consolidated his power through propaganda and careful manipulation of public opinion. Each presented himself as Rome's defender, accusing the other of corruption and betrayal. The stage was set for another civil war. In 31 BCE, tensions culminated in the naval battle of Actium off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's forces, commanded by his general Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Their subsequent suicides in Egypt marked the end of both resistance and the Hellenistic era. Octavian returned to Rome as sole ruler of the Mediterranean world, holding more authority than any Roman before him. Yet he understood that overt monarchy would provoke the same hostility that had doomed Caesar. His solution was subtle: to preserve the outward forms of the republic while concentrating power in his own hands. In 27 BCE, Octavian ceremonially restored authority to the Senate and the Roman people. In gratitude, the Senate awarded him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. This event, often called the settlement of 27 BCE, marked the beginning of the Roman Empire in practice, though not yet in name. Augustus retained command of the army and control of key provinces, ensuring that real power remained with him. The Senate continued to meet, magistrates were still elected, and traditional offices persisted, but all operated under imperial oversight. The Republic's institutions had become instruments of a single ruler's authority. Augustus' genius lay in moderation. Unlike past dictators, he avoided overt displays of domination. He styled himself as princeps, the first citizen, emphasizing leadership through example rather than decree. His policies aimed to rebuild stability after decades of war. Veterans received land settlements. Provincial governors were monitored to prevent corruption, and taxation was standardized. The Praetorian Guard, a permanent force stationed near the capital, ensured loyalty within the heart of government. Augustus also reformed the Senate, reducing its size and prestige to manageable proportions, transforming it from a rival body into a ceremonial council. Under his direction, Rome entered an age of reconstruction. Public works flourished. Roads, aqueducts, and temples were repaired or expanded. The city itself was transformed from brick to marble, as Augustus famously declared. Monumental architecture served both aesthetic and political functions, celebrating peace and prosperity under imperial rule. The Era Pacis, or Altar of Peace, symbolized the stability his regime claimed to bring after a century of turmoil. By aligning his image with divine favor and civic renewal, Augustus created a political mythology that equated his leadership with the destiny of Rome itself. Culturally, the Augustan age fostered a renaissance of literature and art that articulated the values of the new order. Poets such as Virgil, Horace, and Ovid celebrated themes of duty, piety, and renewal. Virgil's Aeneid recast Rome's foundation myth as a prophecy of Augustus's reign, linking the city's origins to divine will and national destiny. This cultural program reinforced unity and pride while subtly legitimizing imperial authority. The arts became instruments of political stability, translating conquest into civilization and monarchy into continuity. Beyond the capital, Augustus reorganized the provinces into an integrated administrative system. Governors were appointed based on competence rather than political favor, and local elites were encouraged to participate in governance. This inclusiveness promoted loyalty and efficiency. In the western provinces, Latin colonies spread Roman law, language, and customs. In the east, Greek cities retained their autonomy in exchange for tribute and peace. This balance of local tradition and centralized control became the hallmark of Roman administration for centuries. The army, once a vehicle for personal ambition, was transformed into a professional standing force loyal to the emperor. Legionaries enlisted for fixed terms and received pensions upon discharge. This stability reduced internal conflict and ensured the defense of frontiers. Augustus personally inspected military bases and emphasized discipline, creating a bond of loyalty grounded in organization rather than charisma. His establishment of permanent frontier lines along the Rhine, Danube, and Euphrates reflected a strategic shift from conquest to consolidation. Augustus also sought moral reform, believing that the republic's decline had stemmed from social decay. Legislation encouraged marriage and family, penalized adultery, and rewarded large households. While these laws met limited success, they reflected his attempt to align private virtue with public order. Religious life was revived through the restoration of ancient temples and priesthoods, reinforcing the idea that Rome's power derived from divine favor. By presenting himself as both restorer of tradition and guarantor of peace, Augustus bridged the gap between old republican values and the realities of imperial rule. When Augustus died in 14 CE, he left behind a functioning system of governance that endured for generations. His careful balance between autocracy and republican facade allowed the empire to appear lawful while remaining firmly under imperial control. The Senate deified him, establishing the precedent of emperor worship that would bind political authority to religious reverence. His successor, Tiberius, inherited not a collapsing regime, but a stable state supported by efficient administration and loyal legions. The birth of the Roman Empire thus represented both an end and a beginning. The Republic's centuries-long experiment in shared governance had finally given way to centralized rule, yet the empire retained its laws, language, and institutions. The shift from collective to singular authority was gradual, rationalized through appeals to order and continuity. What began as a response to chaos evolved into a durable political structure capable of managing a vast and diverse world. In the span of a single generation, Rome transformed from a fractured republic into a unified empire. Through careful reform, administrative innovation, and the mastery of public perception, Augustus achieved what centuries of warfare had failed to accomplish: lasting internal peace. The age of emperors had begun, and with it, the most enduring chapter in Rome's long history. The reign of Augustus inaugurated an era of unprecedented stability that later historians would call the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Spanning roughly 2 centuries, this period represented the consolidation of Roman rule across the Mediterranean world. It was not peace in the modern sense, but a condition in which war was confined to distant frontiers while the empire's core experienced prosperity, order, and administrative cohesion. The Pax Romana marked the height of Roman civilization, when efficient governance, economic integration, and cultural exchange created a durable framework that would influence Europe and the Mediterranean for millennia. Augustus had established the political foundation. His successors maintained and refined it. The early emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, each contributed to the evolution of imperial administration. Tiberius, though often portrayed as austere and suspicious, ensured continuity by preserving the bureaucracy and fiscal discipline. Under Claudius, the empire expanded further, notably through the annexation of Britannia in 43 CE, demonstrating that measured conquest still served imperial policy. Claudius also reformed the civil service, employing freedmen in key roles and improving communication with the provinces. Despite occasional excesses and court intrigues, these emperors preserved the stability that had eluded the late republic. At the heart of this stability was an efficient system of provincial governance. The empire was divided into senatorial provinces, governed by men appointed by the Senate, and imperial provinces, overseen by the emperor's representatives. This dual structure balanced local tradition with central oversight. Taxes were collected with relative consistency, roads were maintained, and justice was administered through a hierarchy of officials. The principle of Roman law extended to all citizens, and over time, even non-citizens benefited from its protection. The legal system emphasized property rights, contracts, and civic obligations, providing the foundation for commerce and social order. The Roman army, reorganized under Augustus, became the guarantor of this peace. Stationed along the frontiers from the Rhine to the Euphrates, the legions acted both as defenders and as agents of Romanization. Military camps evolved into permanent towns, fostering trade and cultural exchange. Veterans settled nearby, bringing Roman customs and Latin speech to distant provinces. Discipline and professionalism replaced the political volatility of earlier centuries. While wars still occurred, particularly in Germany, Judea, and along the eastern borders, they were localized, rarely threatening the integrity of the empire as a whole. The Pax Romana also brought remarkable economic development. A vast network of roads and sea routes connected regions that had once been isolated. Grain from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, and silk from the east circulated through Roman markets. The Mediterranean became an internal sea of commerce, protected by the imperial navy. Standardized coinage and stable governance encouraged trade and urban growth. Cities flourished across the empire, from Londinium in the west to Antioch in the east, each reflecting the architectural and civic patterns of Rome itself. The empire's prosperity was visible in its infrastructure, bridges, aqueducts, and amphitheaters that symbolized both engineering mastery and civic pride. Cultural integration accompanied economic expansion. Latin became the language of administration in the West, while Greek continued to dominate the East. This bilingual world facilitated communication and exchange between peoples. Education spread through municipal schools, emphasizing rhetoric, philosophy, and Roman law. Local elites were encouraged to adopt Roman customs, ensuring loyalty through participation rather than coercion. Citizenship, once restricted to the city of Rome, gradually expanded. By the time of Emperor Caracalla in the early 3rd century, it would be extended to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire, a culmination of centuries of assimilation. Religion during the Pax Romana was both traditional and adaptive. The state cults of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus coexisted with local deities and mystery religions imported from the East. Emperors were deified after death, creating a unifying symbol of loyalty. Temples, altars, and festivals celebrated the emperor's role as guarantor of peace. Yet this religious pluralism also laid the groundwork for change. In Judea, tensions between Roman authority and local traditions produced repeated revolts, most notably the Jewish War of 66 to 73 CE, which ended with the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Out of these conflicts emerged new spiritual movements, among them Christianity, which would later transform the empire itself. The Flavian dynasty, following the turmoil of Nero's death and a brief civil war, restored order under Vespasian and his sons Titus and Domitian. Vespasian stabilized finances and reaffirmed military discipline, while Titus oversaw reconstruction after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE and the Great Fire of Rome. The Flavians continued to invest in monumental architecture, including the construction of the Colosseum, which stood as a symbol of Roman engineering and civic generosity. Such public works reinforced the legitimacy of the imperial system, offering tangible proof of peace and prosperity. The 2nd century CE is often regarded as the apex of the Pax Romana. Under the emperors Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, the so-called Five Good Emperors, the empire achieved its greatest territorial extent and administrative efficiency. Trajan's conquests in Dacia and Mesopotamia enriched Rome with new resources and trade routes. Hadrian, recognizing the limits of expansion, consolidated the frontiers, fortifying them with defensive works such as the wall that still bears his name in Britain. Antoninus Pius presided over an age of calm governance, marked by legal reform and humanitarian policy. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher and soldier, embodied the ideal of the wise ruler, balancing stoic reflection with the burdens of empire. During this golden age, the empire's population reached an estimated 70 million, supported by stable agriculture and thriving cities. Provincial towns became centers of administration, art, and learning. Local elites, granted Roman citizenship, participated in government, funding temples, baths, and theaters in return for prestige. The spread of Roman architecture, from triumphal arches to basilicas, reflected a shared civic identity that transcended geography. The empire's durability rested on this integration, a sense of belonging to a vast but coherent order governed by law and reason. Beneath the surface of prosperity, however, new challenges were beginning to emerge. The cost of maintaining armies and infrastructure strained finances. Dependence on slave labor limited technological innovation, and uneven wealth distribution persisted. Natural disasters, plagues, and occasional rebellions reminded citizens of the fragility of peace. Yet for most inhabitants, the empire remained a source of security and opportunity unmatched in the ancient world. The Pax Romana provided the conditions in which art, literature, and philosophy flourished, creating a legacy that would define Western civilization. By the end of the 2nd century, the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE symbolized the close of this long era of harmony. His son Commodus inherited an empire still powerful but increasingly vulnerable to corruption and complacency. The balance between stability and ambition, maintained for generations, began to tilt toward decline. The Pax Romana had achieved what no earlier state had managed, a unified, peaceful Mediterranean world governed by law and sustained by shared prosperity. Its end would not come through sudden collapse, but through the slow erosion of the principles that had made it possible. Roman society during the imperial age reflected both continuity and transformation. The empire's peace and prosperity allowed its people to define what it meant to live as Romans, even far from the city that gave the empire its name. Daily life across the Mediterranean revolved around structures that emphasized order, hierarchy, and civic participation. From the bustling streets of Rome to the distant towns of Gaul, Africa, and Syria, the rhythms of work, worship, and leisure followed patterns that mirrored the empire's stability and its social divisions. At the heart of Roman life stood the family. The household, or familia, was not simply a private unit, but a miniature reflection of the state. Authority rested with the paterfamilias, the male head of the family, who exercised legal control over property, dependents, and even the lives of his children. Marriage was a social contract rather than a romantic ideal, binding families for political or economic advantage. Women, though formally subordinate, held influence through household management and social networks. Wealthy Roman women could own property, run businesses, and sponsor public works, though their legal status remained defined by male guardianship. The family's strength was seen as the moral foundation of society, linking private discipline to public virtue. Education reinforced these values from an early age. Boys and girls learned reading, writing, and arithmetic at home or in local schools. For the elite, instruction extended to rhetoric, philosophy, and Greek literature, reflecting the cultural prestige of Hellenic learning. The ability to speak persuasively in public remained a hallmark of Roman citizenship, inherited from the Republic's traditions. Even as imperial power replaced republican politics, rhetoric continued to shape public life through law courts, ceremonies, and literature. Education became a means of social advancement and a vehicle for transmitting Roman ideals across provinces. Social hierarchy defined every aspect of life. At the top stood the senatorial and equestrian orders, wealthy classes whose members filled high offices and controlled vast estates. Beneath them were the common citizens, or plebs, who formed the bulk of the urban population. Freedmen, former slaves who had earned or been granted liberty, occupied an intermediate position, often serving as skilled artisans or administrators. At the bottom were slaves, who performed the labor that sustained the empire. Slavery was not based on race, but on conquest and debt. In the countryside, slaves worked on large estates. In cities, they served in households, workshops, and public institutions. Although manumission offered a path to freedom, the system underscored the profound inequality at the core of Roman society. Religion permeated every level of existence. Romans viewed their world as governed by reciprocal obligations between humans and the divine. Public ceremonies honored the gods who protected the state: Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and the deified emperors, while private rituals maintained harmony within households. Temples, altars, and festivals structured the civic calendar, turning religious participation into an expression of citizenship. The imperial cult, which venerated the living and deceased emperors, functioned as both devotion and political loyalty. Yet the empire's vastness brought exposure to countless other faiths. Mystery religions such as those of Isis, Mithras, and Cybele attracted followers seeking personal salvation rather than public order. This diversity created an atmosphere of spiritual experimentation that would eventually give rise to new faiths with universal appeal. The arts flourished under imperial patronage. Architecture reached new heights of sophistication, combining practicality with grandeur. Concrete construction allowed the creation of vast interior spaces such as the Pantheon and the Great Bath complexes. Sculptors and painters continued the traditions of Greece but adapted them to Roman themes: realism, civic pride, and commemoration. Portraiture captured individuality rather than ideal beauty, reflecting Roman respect for lineage and public achievement. Mosaics and frescoes adorned homes and temples, illustrating mythology, daily life, and nature in intricate detail. Public monuments celebrated military victories and civic generosity, turning the urban landscape into a visual narrative of imperial power. Entertainment occupied a central place in Roman culture. The amphitheater, circus, and baths were social institutions as much as places of leisure. Gladiatorial games, inherited from funerary rituals, evolved into grand spectacles funded by emperors and politicians to display generosity and reinforce loyalty. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus drew massive crowds and fierce factional rivalries. Public baths served as centers of hygiene, exercise, and conversation, blurring the line between recreation and civic life. These institutions embodied the Roman belief that citizenship included both privilege and participation, that collective enjoyment reinforced social cohesion. Urban life during the empire reflected both wealth and disparity. Rome itself housed more than 1 million inhabitants, making it the largest city of the ancient world. Its skyline was dominated by temples, theaters, and multi-story apartment blocks known as insulae. The contrast between the opulent villas of the elite and the crowded tenements of the poor was stark. Public distributions of grain and entertainment, known as panem et circenses, bread and circuses, helped maintain order among the urban masses. Similar patterns appeared in provincial capitals, where Roman architecture and administration coexisted with local traditions. Cities such as Carthage, Alexandria, and Antioch became vibrant centers of trade and culture, each blending Roman structure with regional identity. Language and law provided the glue that bound this diverse world together. Latin served as the administrative language of the western provinces, spreading Roman legal concepts and political vocabulary. In the eastern provinces, Greek remained the common tongue, creating a bilingual empire where communication and commerce flourished. The universality of Roman law allowed people from different backgrounds to conduct business and seek justice within a shared framework. Citizenship, once exclusive, became increasingly attainable, culminating in its extension to all free inhabitants of the empire. This legal inclusivity transformed the empire from a conqueror's dominion into a common civic order. Literature mirrored the complexity of Roman society. Historians such as Livy, Tacitus, and Suetonius chronicled the empire's rise and moral struggles. Poets continued to refine Latin verse, exploring themes of love, virtue, and fate. Philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius turned Stoicism into a guide for ethical life within an imperial framework, emphasizing duty, rationality, and self-control. These works preserved the intellectual heritage of Rome and revealed its moral preoccupations: how to live honorably in a vast, hierarchical, and often corrupt world. The social fabric of the empire, though resilient, rested on delicate balances. Prosperity depended on provincial cooperation, military discipline, and administrative competence. Social mobility was possible but limited. Ambition had to navigate the constraints of patronage and class. Despite inequality, Roman citizens shared a sense of belonging to a larger civilization sustained by law, order, and tradition. Even those at the margins, freedmen, provincials, or foreigners, could aspire to participate in the Roman world through service, loyalty, and cultural adoption. By the 2nd century CE, the empire's cultural integration had reached its height. Roman values, discipline, civic duty, and respect for authority were expressed in every aspect of life, from family rituals to monumental architecture. The Pax Romana had not only unified territories but also created a shared way of life, recognizable from Britain to Egypt. Yet beneath this harmony lay the seeds of transformation. The same cosmopolitanism that had spread Roman culture also fostered new ideas and faiths that would eventually challenge it. As prosperity reached its zenith, subtle shifts in belief and identity were already preparing the empire for change. The Roman Empire's military machine was both the foundation of its expansion and the instrument of its stability. For centuries, the legions had defined Roman identity, discipline, and power. By the imperial period, warfare had evolved from citizen militias defending the Republic into a professional army serving the emperor. The transformation of the Roman military was not merely organizational. It was cultural and political. It shaped the empire's borders, its society, and its very sense of destiny. The professionalization of the Roman army began under Augustus, who recognized that the loyalty of the legions could no longer rest on fleeting patriotism or temporary service. Soldiers enlisted for fixed terms, typically 20 years, receiving regular pay, standardized equipment, and a pension upon discharge. This system provided stability and allowed for the creation of a disciplined standing army loyal not to the Senate or the Republic, but to the emperor himself. The oath of allegiance, or sacramentum, symbolized this personal bond between soldier and ruler. It was a crucial innovation that ensured order within the vast imperial framework. Each legion consisted of roughly 5,000 heavy infantry, supported by cavalry and auxiliary units recruited from the provinces. The legions were elite formations, composed primarily of Roman citizens, while auxiliaries, non-citizens, served as archers, slingers, or cavalrymen, bringing regional skills to the Roman war effort. Upon completing their service, auxiliaries were granted citizenship, reinforcing the link between military service and Roman identity. The army thus became a powerful vehicle of cultural assimilation, spreading Roman law, language, and customs wherever it was stationed. Discipline remained the cornerstone of Roman military success. Training was rigorous and continuous. Soldiers marched long distances under full load, built camps at the end of each day, and practiced formation maneuvers until precision became instinct. Punishments for disobedience were severe, ranging from fines to execution, while rewards for valor, citizenship, land grants, or decorations reinforced loyalty. The army functioned as a self-sustaining community with its own hierarchy, rituals, and traditions. Standardized organization ensured that any legion, regardless of origin, could operate efficiently alongside another. Tactics and engineering set the Roman army apart from its contemporaries. The manipular and cohort systems, refined over centuries, provided flexibility and coordination in battle. The legion's rectangular formation allowed for both offense and defense, enabling disciplined rotations of the front line. Siege warfare was a particular Roman specialty. Engineers constructed elaborate fortifications, siege ramps, and artillery such as ballistae and onagers. Temporary camps could be transformed into permanent forts, demonstrating the army's dual role as conqueror and builder. The same soldiers who fought in wars also constructed roads, bridges, and fortifications that extended Roman infrastructure deep into conquered territories. Logistics were equally vital. The Roman road network, stretching over 400,000 kilometers, was designed primarily for military mobility. Supplies, orders, and reinforcements could move with speed unmatched in the ancient world. Along the frontiers, fortified camps, castra, served as administrative and commercial centers, often developing into towns once soldiers retired and settled nearby. This integration of military and civilian life blurred the boundaries between defense and colonization. The army was not merely stationed at the edges of the empire. It created the conditions for Romanization itself. Command structure was hierarchical, yet pragmatic. The emperor held supreme authority as imperator, but legates and centurions exercised significant autonomy in the field. Centurions, experienced veterans who commanded units of roughly 100 men, were the backbone of the legions. Their authority combined technical skill with moral discipline, ensuring that orders were executed with precision. Promotions were based largely on merit, creating a rare avenue of social mobility within the rigid structure of Roman society. The army thus embodied both order and opportunity, uniting men from diverse backgrounds under a shared sense of purpose. The army's strategic outlook shifted over time. Under Augustus and his successors, expansion gave way to consolidation. The empire's borders along the Rhine, Danube, and Euphrates became permanent defensive lines. Forts, watchtowers, and walls, such as Hadrian's Wall in Britain, marked the limits of Roman control. These frontier systems, known as limes, were not mere barriers but zones of interaction. Trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange took place alongside patrols and garrisons. Rome's power rested as much on deterrence and negotiation as on direct conquest. Naval power also played a crucial role in maintaining imperial order. The Mediterranean, once plagued by piracy, became a secure Roman lake, Mare Nostrum, our sea. Fleets stationed at strategic ports protected trade routes and transported troops. River flotillas patrolled the Rhine and Danube, ensuring communication between frontier posts. Although less celebrated than the legions, the navy was essential to the logistics and unity of the empire. It symbolized the transformation of Rome from a city-state fighting for survival into a global maritime power. The relationship between the military and the economy was symbiotic. Armies stimulated local economies by demanding food, materials, and labor. Markets grew around forts, and entire industries, metalworking, leather production, grain supply, developed to meet military needs. In return, the army maintained the security that allowed commerce to flourish. Soldiers themselves became agents of economic integration, spending their pay in provincial towns and marrying into local families. The army thus reinforced both imperial control and social cohesion, even far from the capital. Yet the same institution that sustained Rome also carried the seeds of its instability. The loyalty of soldiers to their commanders rather than to the state occasionally produced civil wars, as ambitious generals used legions to seize power. Succession crises often began as military disputes, with troops proclaiming their leaders as emperors. Over time, the increasing reliance on non-Italian recruits and mercenaries diluted the traditional bond between soldier and state. By the 3rd century, political loyalty had become a fragile commodity, bought through bonuses and promises rather than civic devotion. Despite these long-term tensions, the Roman military remained the most formidable force of the ancient world for centuries. Its discipline, adaptability, and engineering skill created an empire that stretched from the deserts of Africa to the highlands of Scotland. Every road, fort, and city bore witness to its presence. The Roman soldier was not only a warrior, but also a builder, colonist, and symbol of order. Through his labor and loyalty, the empire's borders were maintained, and its civilization carried forward. The Roman military machine was more than an instrument of conquest. It was the framework upon which the empire rested. It projected authority, enforced peace, and spread culture. Its organization inspired later armies, its roads became Europe's arteries, and its discipline left a legacy that outlasted the empire itself. When the empire began to falter, it was the weakening of this institution that signaled the approaching end. But during its height, the Roman army stood as the embodiment of a civilization that prized structure, endurance, and command, a disciplined force that turned ambition into empire. By the late 2nd century CE, the empire that had enjoyed 2 centuries of relative stability began to show signs of strain. The vastness that had once been its strength now presented challenges that even the most capable rulers could not easily manage. Political corruption, economic imbalance, and external pressures converged to create what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 180 and 284 CE, the Roman world was transformed by decades of upheaval that tested the very foundations of imperial rule. The trouble began with the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE. His son and successor, Commodus, lacked the discipline and wisdom of his father. His erratic rule undermined the stability of the imperial system. By associating himself with gladiatorial spectacle and arbitrary executions, Commodus alienated both the Senate and the army. His assassination in 192 CE unleashed a wave of political violence. Within a single year, 5 different men claimed the imperial throne, each supported by competing legions. The empire, once unified under a single authority, had become hostage to its own military power. This instability was compounded by economic distress. The cost of maintaining the army and the imperial bureaucracy strained finances, forcing emperors to debase the currency by reducing its silver content. Inflation eroded confidence in money and disrupted trade. Meanwhile, the empire's population suffered from repeated plagues that reduced manpower and agricultural productivity. Large estates absorbed smaller farms, deepening inequality and driving rural populations into debt or servitude. Urban decline followed as resources were diverted to sustain military campaigns and pay the loyalty of troops. The external threats multiplied as Rome's enemies grew stronger and more organized. Along the northern frontier, Germanic tribes pressed across the Rhine and Danube, testing Roman defenses. In the east, the Parthian Empire was replaced by the more aggressive Sasanian Persians, who sought to reclaim territories once held by Alexander's successors. In 260 CE, the Emperor Valerian suffered the humiliation of being captured alive by the Persian king Shapur I, a symbolic moment that revealed the empire's vulnerability. Raids, invasions, and usurpations became constant features of imperial life, eroding the sense of security that had defined the Pax Romana. Internally, the empire fragmented. Regional commanders declared independence in order to defend their territories when central authority failed. The Gallic Empire, formed in 260 CE under Postumus, controlled Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain, while in the east, Palmyra under Queen Zenobia established a de facto empire that extended from Egypt to Asia Minor. These breakaway states maintained Roman culture and institutions but acted autonomously, reflecting the decentralization of power that now characterized the empire. Despite the chaos, the Roman system proved remarkably resilient. The crisis produced a succession of short-lived emperors, many of whom rose from the army's ranks. Though their reigns were brief, these soldier emperors displayed adaptability and determination. They fought both external enemies and internal rivals, attempting to preserve what unity they could. The constant turnover in leadership, however, prevented long-term reform. The empire became a military autocracy without consistent policy, its resources drained by endless conflict. Cultural and religious shifts also reflected the empire's fragmentation. Traditional Roman religion, once the unifying fabric of society, lost its authority. The cult of the emperor no longer commanded universal reverence, while mystery religions and new faiths spread among the population. Christianity, once a minor sect, grew rapidly during this era, offering hope and community amid disorder. Though persecuted intermittently, its organization and moral clarity attracted converts across classes and regions. The spread of Christianity revealed both the empire's diversity and the waning influence of its old institutions. Reform began under Emperor Aurelian, who ruled from 270 to 275 CE. Aurelian reasserted control over the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene empires, reuniting the Mediterranean world under a single authority. His military victories earned him the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. He strengthened the frontiers, built new defensive walls around Rome, and reformed the currency. Aurelian also revived imperial ideology, promoting the worship of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as a symbol of unity under divine protection. Though his reign was brief, it demonstrated that decisive leadership could restore coherence to a fractured empire. Following Aurelian, a series of pragmatic rulers continued the process of stabilization. Administrative efficiency improved, and frontier defenses were reinforced. Yet the deeper structural issues remained unresolved. The empire was too vast, its population too diverse, and its economy too strained to be managed from a single center. By the time Diocletian came to power in 284 CE, it was clear that the old imperial system could not endure in its traditional form. Diocletian's accession marked the beginning of a new phase. A career soldier from humble origins, he understood the need for reform grounded in discipline and control. He reorganized the empire into smaller administrative units, each overseen by loyal officials, reducing corruption and improving tax collection. Recognizing that one man could no longer govern the entire realm effectively, he established the Tetrarchy, dividing rule among two senior emperors, Augusti, and two junior colleagues, Caesars. This system aimed to ensure continuity and rapid response to threats, while reinforcing the sanctity of imperial authority. Diocletian also sought to restore confidence in the economy. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 CE, an attempt to curb inflation by fixing the cost of goods and services. Though the policy proved difficult to enforce, it reflected the government's growing involvement in economic life. He strengthened the army and expanded its numbers, reinforcing the frontiers with permanent garrisons. His reign brought a measure of order that the empire had not known for a century, but at the cost of increased bureaucracy and centralized control. Religiously, Diocletian attempted to revive traditional worship, believing that the empire's survival depended on divine favor. His persecution of Christians, one of the most severe in Roman history, was part of this broader effort to restore unity through religious conformity. Yet the movement he sought to suppress continued to grow, strengthened by its internal discipline and moral appeal. The tension between the old Roman gods and the new faith would shape the empire's next transformation. By the early 4th century, the crisis had fundamentally altered the nature of Roman rule. The empire had survived, but it was no longer the same entity that Augustus had created. Centralized autocracy, administrative division, and a complex military bureaucracy replaced the older, more flexible system. The ideals of republican tradition had long since faded, replaced by the need for order above all else. The experience of crisis had taught Rome that survival required adaptation, even at the cost of liberty. The 3rd century turmoil marked the turning point between the classical empire of the Pax Romana and the late empire of fortified borders and rigid hierarchy. From the chaos emerged a state more authoritarian, more bureaucratic, and more self-consciously imperial. The reforms of Diocletian and his successors laid the groundwork for a new equilibrium, one that would soon take on a spiritual and political dimension under a future emperor who would change Rome forever. When Diocletian retired in 305 CE, the system he had built began to fracture almost immediately. The Tetrarchy, designed to prevent civil war, instead produced it. Rivalries among the emperors and their heirs led to renewed conflict. Into this struggle emerged Constantine, a general of remarkable ambition and political acumen. By 324 CE, he had defeated all opponents, reunified the empire, and set it on a new course that would transform the Roman world. His reign marked the final consolidation of imperial power and the dawn of a Christian empire. Constantine's most enduring act was the founding of a new capital. Recognizing that Rome was no longer the strategic or political center of the empire, he established Constantinople on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Its location on the Bosporus Strait gave it command over trade routes between Europe and Asia and natural defenses surrounded by water on 3 sides. In 330 CE, he dedicated the city as Nova Roma, the New Rome, though it would soon bear his name. Constantinople symbolized both continuity and transformation, a Roman city in form, yet oriented toward the Greek-speaking East and infused with Christian identity. The rise of Christianity reshaped every aspect of Roman life. Constantine's conversion, followed by the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, legalized the faith and ended centuries of persecution. The emperor granted privileges to the church, endowed basilicas, and convened councils to settle theological disputes, most notably the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. Christianity provided a new moral and ideological foundation for the empire, aligning divine authority with imperial rule. The old pantheon receded, temples fell into disuse, and bishops emerged as influential figures not only in religion but in civic administration. The transformation of Rome from pagan empire to Christian commonwealth was one of the most profound shifts in world history. Yet even as this new order took root, the pressures on the empire deepened. The economic burdens remained immense. Agricultural productivity had declined, trade routes were insecure, and taxation grew more oppressive. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands, and the middle strata of society eroded. Peasants, unable to pay taxes or rent, were increasingly bound to the land, forming the early outlines of the medieval serfdom that would replace Roman civic life. Urban centers diminished as populations sought security in rural estates or fortified settlements. The military, though still formidable, was overstretched. Defending the frontiers required vast resources, and the shifting of populations across Europe created new challenges. Germanic tribes, long familiar with Roman culture through trade and service as mercenaries, began to cross the borders in larger numbers. Some came as refugees, others as invaders. The empire's policy of settling federate tribes within its borders brought temporary peace but eroded control over the frontier regions. The distinction between Roman and barbarian became increasingly blurred, as provincial governors and generals relied on tribal allies to maintain order. After Constantine's death in 337 CE, his successors struggled to maintain unity. The empire was divided among his sons and later emperors, leading once more to internal conflict. Theodosius I, ruling from 379 to 395 CE, became the last emperor to govern both East and West. He solidified Christianity as the state religion, outlawing pagan practices and closing temples that had stood for centuries. His policies unified the empire under one faith, but deepened its cultural divide. The eastern provinces, wealthier and more urbanized, gravitated toward the Greek-speaking Christian tradition, while the western provinces faced economic contraction and social decay. The late 4th century brought new waves of migrations and invasions. In 376 CE, the Visigoths sought refuge within the empire from the advancing Huns, fierce nomadic horsemen from the Eurasian steppe. Mistreatment by Roman officials led to rebellion, culminating in the catastrophic Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, where the Emperor Valens was killed and his army destroyed. The defeat revealed the vulnerability of Roman arms and marked the end of the illusion that the empire's borders were impenetrable. From this point onward, the Western Empire was in retreat, relying increasingly on negotiated settlements and alliances rather than decisive military victories. The 5th century opened with a succession of crises. The Western Empire, centered in Italy, was weakened by constant civil wars and declining revenues. Barbarian generals, once hired as mercenaries, became kingmakers. In 410 CE, Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric, a shock that reverberated across the Mediterranean world. Though the city recovered materially, its symbolic authority was irreparably damaged. The empire's capital had already shifted to Ravenna, a more defensible location amid northern Italy's marshes. The government's reliance on diplomacy and tribute to manage invasions reflected its loss of strength. Over the following decades, provinces slipped away one by one. Vandals established a kingdom in North Africa, seizing Carthage in 439 CE and cutting off the grain supply to Italy. The Visigoths settled in Gaul and Spain, creating semi-independent realms. In Britain, Roman administration collapsed entirely, leaving the island to local warlords and migrating Germanic tribes. The Western Empire's tax base dwindled, its army shrank, and its bureaucracy withered. What remained of central authority struggled to function as a cohesive state. In contrast, the Eastern Empire centered on Constantinople adapted more effectively. Its stronger economy, professional bureaucracy, and defensible position allowed it to withstand the same pressures that destroyed the West. Greek language and culture came to dominate, while Roman law and imperial ceremony were preserved. This Eastern Empire, later known as Byzantium, would endure for another 1,000 years, maintaining the legacy of Roman governance and learning even as the West descended into fragmentation. The Western Empire's final years were marked by desperation and resignation. In 451 CE, the Huns under Attila invaded Gaul, only to be repelled by a coalition of Romans and Germanic allies. The victory delayed but did not prevent collapse. Within 20 years, barbarian commanders effectively controlled what remained of the Roman administration. In 476 CE, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the young Emperor Romulus Augustulus and declared himself ruler of Italy, sending the imperial regalia to Constantinople. The act symbolized not a dramatic fall, but the quiet acknowledgement that Roman rule in the West had come to its end. The transformation of the Roman world was gradual, not sudden. The institutions of empire, law, administration, and culture did not vanish but evolved into the structures that would define medieval Europe. The Catholic Church assumed many of the empire's administrative roles, preserving literacy and continuity. Latin remained the language of learning and law, while Roman roads, cities, and customs persisted in altered form. The dream of Rome endured in the imagination of kings and scholars, shaping empires that followed. The fall of the Western Empire was not merely a story of decline, but of transition. The old order of centralized imperial authority gave way to a new world of local powers and Christian kingdoms. The East remained as a living heir, while the West inherited its ruins and its memory. From these fragments, Europe's medieval civilization would emerge, blending Roman discipline, Christian faith, and barbarian vigor into a new synthesis. The empire had fallen, but its shadow stretched across the centuries that followed, defining the political and cultural landscape of the Western world. The legacy of Rome is one of endurance, transformation, and influence that reaches far beyond the boundaries of its ancient empire. Though its political structure collapsed in the West, the foundations it laid in law, governance, architecture, and culture continued to shape civilizations across continents and centuries. Rome's institutions and ideas became the framework upon which much of the modern world was built, ensuring that its spirit never truly vanished. Roman law was perhaps its most lasting contribution. The codification of legal principles, particularly under the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, preserved centuries of jurisprudence in the Corpus Juris Civilis. This monumental compilation became the basis of legal thought in medieval Europe and, later, the foundation of modern civil law systems used by nations across the globe. The concepts of natural rights, property, citizenship, and due process that originated in Roman law still inform legal systems today. The Roman understanding of justice as a rational and universal principle transcended the empire's demise and became a cornerstone of Western civilization. In government and administration, Rome's legacy was equally profound. The empire's sophisticated bureaucracy, its provincial governance, and its system of taxation provided a model for later states. Medieval monarchies adopted the Roman ideal of centralized authority, while republics and modern democracies drew inspiration from the Roman Senate and assemblies. The language of political power, terms like senator, republic, and imperium, has endured for 2 millennia. Even the architectural forms of governance, domed halls, marble facades, and triumphal arches, echo the imperial grandeur of Rome. The very idea of a united Europe under common laws and institutions traces its lineage to the Roman vision of a shared order. Culturally, the Roman synthesis of Greek philosophy, art, and science created a heritage that bridged antiquity and modernity. The Romans preserved and disseminated Hellenistic knowledge through libraries, schools, and translations, ensuring that the intellectual achievements of Greece survived the turbulence of later centuries. Roman literature, from Virgil's Aeneid to Cicero's orations, defined standards of eloquence and civic virtue that influenced education for generations. The Latin language, once confined to the banks of the Tiber, evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and remained the language of scholarship and religion throughout the Middle Ages. Rome's engineering and architecture were visible manifestations of its discipline and ambition. The aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters that still stand today are testaments to a civilization that valued order, durability, and practical design. Roman concrete revolutionized construction, allowing for vast domes like that of the Pantheon, which continues to inspire architects around the world. The grid layouts of Roman cities influenced urban planning for centuries, from medieval bastions to the capitals of modern empires. Every bridge, forum, and colonnade carried the imprint of Roman ingenuity and the belief that infrastructure was a form of civilization itself. Religion marked another profound aspect of Rome's legacy. The transformation of Christianity from a persecuted sect into the official faith of the empire altered the course of global history. The Roman Church inherited the administrative structure of the empire, dividing territories into dioceses and provinces. The Bishop of Rome, later known as the Pope, assumed both spiritual and political authority, positioning the Church as the enduring heir of Roman order in the post-imperial world. Through the Church, Roman values of discipline, hierarchy, and law found new life within Christian doctrine, guiding the moral and social frameworks of Europe for centuries. In the Eastern Empire, which evolved into Byzantium, Roman governance continued in refined form. The Byzantines preserved the administrative and legal systems of Rome, speaking Greek but calling themselves Romans. They maintained imperial ceremony, military organization, and diplomatic sophistication that influenced both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. Constantinople became the bridge between the classical and modern eras, transmitting Roman traditions to the Renaissance and beyond. When the city finally fell in 1453, scholars carried its manuscripts westward, sparking renewed study of ancient texts that fueled Europe's intellectual revival. Rome's military legacy also left an indelible mark. Its discipline, logistics, and command structures became the foundation of organized warfare in the Western world. The principles of fortification, road networks, and supply chains developed by Roman engineers informed military science from medieval castles to modern campaigns. The Roman ideal of the citizen soldier, duty-bound, disciplined, and loyal to the state, remained a powerful symbol of civic responsibility. The Renaissance brought Rome's cultural and artistic revival to full circle. Humanist scholars revered classical texts, artists studied ancient statues, and architects resurrected Roman proportions. Michelangelo's dome for St. Peter's Basilica, the design of European capitals, and even the United States Capitol all reflect a conscious inheritance of Roman ideals. Enlightenment thinkers looked to Rome as both a warning and a guide, admiring its legal and civic achievements while pondering the causes of its decline. To them, Rome was not merely history. It was a mirror for every civilization that aspired to greatness. In the modern age, the Roman ideal of universal order continues to influence international relations, law, and identity. The European Union, with its emphasis on unity among diverse nations, echoes the Roman aspiration for a single community governed by shared principles. The use of Latin in science, medicine, and law preserves the intellectual language of the empire. Even the calendar, months, and planetary names remind us daily of Rome's presence in our world. The story of Rome endures because it embodies both the possibilities and the fragility of civilization. Its rise from a small settlement on the Tiber to a global empire demonstrated the power of organization, discipline, and vision. Its decline revealed the dangers of overextension and internal division. Yet its legacy, its language, laws, and institutions, remains the living foundation upon which countless societies have built their identities. In the end, Rome never truly disappeared. It transformed, adapted, and re-emerged in new forms across time. Every road that leads to a city, every court of law, every building crowned with a dome, carries something of its inheritance. The empire's banners may have fallen, but its spirit continues to shape the modern world. Through its achievements and its lessons, Rome remains the enduring symbol of humanity's search for order, greatness, and meaning across the ages.